Hi, I'm Eric Siegel with ericstrains.com. Today we're going to be taking a look at the brand new 3-rail O-scale 484 Reading T1 from Lionel. Alright, so let's start things off with a brief history on the T1. The T1 was a class of 484 Northern type steam locomotives that were operated by the Reading Railroad starting in 1945. Now, the T1 was a 484 type steam engine, and for you newcomers, that means that it had 4 wheels on the lead truck, 8 drive wheels, and then 4 wheels on the trailing truck, and so they designated it as a 484. Now, the story of how the T1s came about is that the president of the Reading, a guy named Rev L. Brown, was searching for a way to speed up freight service on his railroad, and apparently he was very inspired by the 484 Wyoming class of steam engines that were being run by his previous employer, the Lehigh Valley Railroad. So, convinced that the 484 was what the Reading needed, Brown and the Reading Superintendent of Motive Power teamed up with Baldwin Locomotive Works to develop a plan to convert 30 of the Reading's I-10A 280 consolidations to 484 Northerns. As intended, they did end up converting 30 of their 280s to 484s between 1945 and 1947, and the T1 was born. Now, the T1s were used primarily for fast freight service, and they were especially useful for time-sensitive freights as well as coal trains. They were very powerful engines. They were cleared to pull up to 150 cars, but could easily handle at least 200. Unfortunately, because of the rise of diesel power, the T1s had a relatively short lifespan. They weren't even in service for 10 years before they began to be phased out, and the last one was retired from revenue service around 1956. Now, most of the 30 T1s were eventually scrapped, but today there are still 4 T1s in existence, and those are numbers 2100, 2101, 2102, and 2124. Now, of those 4 T1s that still exist, numbers 2100 and 2102 are currently being restored to operating condition. So these 2 T1s should be in excursion service at some point in the future. Okay, now let's change gears and talk about Lionel's rendition of the Reading T1. Now, Lionel offered this newest version of the T1 in their 2016 Volume 1 catalog, and then these things started showing up in stores in December of 2016. Now, my inspiration for buying one of these new Reading T1s actually comes from the original T1 that Lionel made back in 1989. That was a job that was done by Mike Wolf for Lionel. Back then, he was a subcontractor for Lionel, and he was responsible for that T1 being made. And I've always thought that was a beautiful model, and it's actually a historic piece because the original Reading T1 was one of the first engines that Lionel put the Rail Sounds digital sound package into. And so I've always kind of wanted to pick one of those up from a collector's point of view. They're not very expensive, it's just kind of a cool historic piece. But when Lionel came out with the new revamped T1 that you see here, that's got all the modern legacy features, I couldn't resist and I picked one up. Let's go over some stats and facts on this model. The length of the engine is 14 3/4 inches. The length of the tender is right at 12 inches. The overall length of the engine plus the tender is just a hair over 27 inches. The weight of the engine is 7 pounds 4 ounces. The weight of the tender is 3 pounds 12 ounces. That gives us a combined weight of 11 pounds. This engine has pretty good pulling power, 2 pounds 8 ounces, and that's with 18 volts of power on the track at about 1 amp. And the minimum required curve for this engine is 0.54. Under the hood, this engine is powered by one large flywheel motor. There are 2 smoke units in the engine, one for the smokestack and one for the whistle steam smoke effect. And then back in the tender, we've got the electronics for Legacy Rail Sounds and Legacy Command. As always, there are 3 ways to operate this engine. The preferred method is to use Lionel's Legacy Command system, as that will give you access to all of the engine's advanced features. However, you can also run the engine with Lionel's classic TMCC command system, or you can run the engine conventionally with just a transformer and some track. There's lots to see on this engine, so now let's go in for a closer look. Alright, so here we have a look at the front pilot area, and as you can see, it looks great. We've got a little cow catcher grill here. We've got some add-on hose detailing over here on the other side of the coupler. We've got a nice add-on metal coupler cut bar that is connected to a chain and a pin that goes down through a dummy scale coupler. And of course, if you want to double head the engine, you can swap out that dummy scale coupler for this dummy O-gauge coupler that's also packaged with the engine when you buy it. And then above all that, you can see we've got some wonderful detailing up here. It looks great. Moving up, you can see these nice steps that go up to the walkways that go down either side of the engine. Then we've got the start of the separately applied black metal handrails that go down either side of the boiler. Then we've got the smoke box front, which looks great. We've got lots of nice rivet detailing. There's a number plate here. There's also a number board on either side of the operating headlight. Then we've got a little brass bell up here. It's nice. And then the front of the smoke box opens up like that. Pretty cool. As we start to move down the underside of the engine, you can see one of the two sets of cylinders on this engine. It looks really nice. Then we've got the start of all this wonderful looking running gear, and then we have the drive wheels, and all of that stuff looks great when the engine is in motion. And above the drive wheels, we've got some great add-on details. As we get near the underside of the cab, we've got a nice looking firebox and ash pan, and this engine is equipped with the variable ash pan glow effect. So when the engine is running, there's a red glow emanating from the ash pan, and that glow gets more intense the faster the engine goes. Then we've got some nice details here behind the firebox and some wonderfully detailed side frames on the trailing truck. Here's a look at the cab. We've got a nice crisp 2100 below the window. The windows have clear plastic inserts in them, which is nice. On the interior of the cab, there are two hand-painted crew figures. There are a number of hand-painted valves and gauges on a nicely detailed backhead. There's a red glow in the firebox when the engine is in operation, and the inside of the cab is lighted, and that light does turn off when the engine is in motion. As we begin to pull down the side of the boiler, we've got some clear plastic inserts in these front windows, which is nice. We've got that separately applied handrail going down the side, and then you can see part of the throttle linkage as well. And then as we get toward the front, you can see the rest of that throttle linkage and the handrail. We've got some decent cast-in details, and also the walkways up here have safety tread on them, which is nice. Up on top of the engine, right up front, we've got the feed water heater, which is nicely detailed. Then behind that, we've got the smokestack, and there is a fan-driven smoke unit down in there. And as always, to load smoke fluid into the smoke unit, you simply pour the smoke fluid directly down the stack. Moving back, we've got some nice casting details right here, and then back here we've got some hand-painted valves. Behind that, we've got a nice-looking sand dome, and the top of the sand dome can be removed. And that reveals a few things. First of all, we've got some control switches. We've got the run program switch, the Odyssey speed control on-off switch. There's a switch to turn the main smoke unit on or off. That's the smoke unit for the smokestack. Then there's a switch to turn the auxiliary smoke unit on or off. That's the smoke unit for the whistle steam smoke effect. And then right here, we've got the fill hole for the smoke unit that controls the whistle steam smoke effect. So when you need to load smoke fluid into the smoke unit that does the whistle steam smoke effect, this is where you load the smoke fluid. Moving past the sand dome, we've got a steam dome, then we've got a whistle here, and like I said, this engine does have the whistle steam smoke effect, so there's a little hole here behind the whistle, and when you blow the whistle, it shoots smoke out of that hole and gives the illusion of steam shooting out of the whistle. You'll see it in just a few minutes. Then we've got a nice add-on dynamo generator, and then some nice pop-off valves back here. And then on top of the cab, we've got some nice rivet detail going on, and we've got two rooftop vents that open up like that. Here's a look at the gap between the engine and the tender. Now, the gap is actually pretty good for O-scale. The only downside is that there's no drop plate between the engine and the tender, but that's okay, it still looks pretty good. You know, I could spend a lot of time worrying about details that are missing, but if I did that, I would never have time to enjoy the hobby. Here's a look at the back of the engine. Down here at the bottom, we've got the drawbar, and sitting up on top is the infrared sensor that allows the electronics in the engine to communicate with the electronics in the tender. We've got a couple of separately applied grab irons on either side, and then if we shine a light into the cab, you can see it looks pretty good. Can't see everything, but you can see some of the hand-painted valves and gauges, and they've even got some separately applied detailing in there, which is really cool. Here's a quick look at the underside of the engine. We've got 3 pickup rollers for good solid electrical contact, and then we've got traction tires on the last set of drivers. Alright, so that takes care of the engine. Now let's check out the tender. On the underside, we've got some really nice looking die-cast metal truck side frames. Then we've got these gorgeous sides on the tender, which are some of my favorite because it's so clean and simple and elegant. You've just got that big Reading logo, and that's all there is to it. It's absolutely gorgeous in my opinion. Now, the only downside about the sides of this tender, and I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek, is that because it is so smooth and simple, it's really susceptible to fingerprints, so be careful when you're handling this thing. On the front of the tender, we've got some nice step detail going on down here. We've got some separately applied metal grab irons on the corners. Here is the other end of the drawbar assembly, and just like on the other end, there's an infrared sensor sitting up on top, and that allows the electronics in the tender to communicate with the electronics in the engine. Up above that, we've got a deck that does have safety tread on it, which is a nice touch, and then we've got some nice cast-in details up here. On the back of the tender, we've got some separately applied metal steps on the corners as well as some separately applied metal grab irons going on. There's a nice metal ladder here. We've got an operating backup light up here, a coupler cut bar down here, and then in the middle is an electrocoupler that can be thrown from the Legacy or TMCC remote. Up on top of the tender, up front, we've got a real coal load. And, you know, I feel that every few review videos I should clarify that by saying that, yes, this is real coal. It's a little pile of little bits of real coal. On most high-end steam engines, you will find this. On lower-end steam engines or steam engines where they don't want to spend quite as much money, oftentimes the coal load will be made of plastic or metal or something like that. But on these high-end engines, we expect it to be a real coal, and that's what we have. On the other side of the tender, we've got a nice metal ladder here, and then a utility box right there. Then we've got some great-looking add-on metal grab irons all around. And then we've got the water hatch, and if we lift up the hatch, you probably can't see it too well from this angle, but there is the master volume control for the engine. Finally, here's a look at the underside of the tender. We've got 2 pickup rollers, 1 per truck. There's an infrared sensor on this truck for the Lionel LCS sensor track if you choose to use one. And then we've got 2 speakers for the sound system right here. Alright, the last thing we're going to do before we start this thing up is BFIMO, best feature in my opinion. You know, for me, best feature is all about first impressions. It's about what strikes me the most when I take the engine out of the box, put it on the track, and start it up. Sometimes the choice is easy because it's a fancy feature or something really obvious. Other times it's something more subtle, and that's the case with the T1. When I saw the original T1 that Lionel did back in the late 1980s and the new T1 here, the same thing popped out at me, and that is the tender. This is a gorgeous tender. You know, a lot of tenders out there have all sorts of busy action going on. They've got rivets and pipes and valves and hatches and dog houses, and that's great. I love that stuff, but sometimes it's nice to see something that's a little more elegant, and if there ever was an elegant tender, this would be it. It's long, it's slender, there's not all sorts of busy action going on, and of course you've got that beautiful Reading logo scrolled across the side. It doesn't get any better than that. So in my opinion, the best feature of this engine is actually the tender. Alright, let's go ahead and start this thing up.
This is the dispatcher. Do you copy? I copy that. Over. Very good. Start up and hold. Yes, sir. We'll fire her up. Out.
Okay, first up, let's check out the whistle. let's check out the bell. Here's the sound of water being added to the tender.
My water's full. Over. Affirmative. Out.
And here's the sound of coal being added to the tender.
My coal's full. Over. Affirmative. Out.
And also here's the steam blowdown sound. And finally, here's the crew talk sound effects, and I've said this before, but I know a lot of people don't care for them. That's okay. If you don't like them, you don't have to use them, but don't ruin it for the rest of us, because they're a lot of fun.
Dispatcher here. Stand by. Over. Copy that. Standing by. Out. This is the dispatcher. You're clear to pull. Over. Thank you. Clear signal. Out. My coal's full. Out. Dispatcher, ready to roll. Can I pull? Over. Negative. Please hold. Over. Acknowledged. Waiting on a clear signal. Out. Tower, can we move yet? Over. Tower, in position. Ready to go to the house. Over. Tower, my coal's full. Am I clear to the outbound? Over. Roger, your track is clear. Dispatcher, over. Roger that. Here we go. Out. Tower, arrived and in position. Over. Roger that. Welcome back. Out.
Okay, I've got some cars hooked up to the T1, so let's go ahead and roll it out. Alright, that about wraps it up for this review. Now, not only is this engine a lot of fun to run, but it's just plain gorgeous. I love this thing. It's absolutely beautiful. Now, as I said earlier, Lionel has made 5 different versions of the T1 available for sale. There are 4 Reading T1s. There's the 2100 that you see here. There's a 2119, a 2102, and a 2124. And then there's also a chassis system 2101 in the very colorful chassis paint scheme. Now, no matter which T1 you choose to purchase, the price is the same. The retail price on this engine is right at $1,700, so it's not cheap. But keep in mind that is the retail price. If you go through a good Lionel dealer, you should be able to get a little bit of a discount off that retail price. And as always, if you're looking for a good Lionel dealer, try my favorite train store, which is Legacy Station. You can find them on the web at www.legacystation.com or give them a call at 770-339-7780. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm Eric Siegel, and I'll see you next time. To discuss this model or any other O-Gauge trains and to meet other O-Gauge modelers, check out the O-Gauge Railroading Magazine online forum at ogrforum.ogaugerr.com.